You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Welcome to Scuderia F1, the podcast that's always up to speed with the latest Formula One news. Follow us on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod and subscribe to the show on iTunes and Stitcher. Now, here are your hosts, Mark Dailey and Kevin Laramée.
Good day, good night, and welcome to Scuderia F1. I am Kevin Laramée, joined by Mark Dailey. As always, Mark, it's my favorite weekend of the year. It's here, it's now, it's the Canadian Grand Prix, just a few days away. I have my ticket in my hand. I have been sleeping with it for the last 2 days. I don't know how much I can tell you how excited I am.
Yeah, it's great too, and I was remarking just a couple of weeks ago that what with the schedule taking Formula One back to Europe, how that really changed the time of day or night or morning, depending on where they are, that we're able to watch the races in North America. And with it coming to Montreal this week is a chance to watch it at a rather nice time of day rather than at about 4 or 5 in the morning here on the west coast of Canada. So I'm really looking forward to it. Of course, I won't be there. I mean, obviously, I'm in Vancouver, you're in Montreal, so it's literally right in your backyard.
It is, and for the first time in 33 years, I will be attending. And if you follow the Facebook page of Scuderia F1, you will get some behind-the-scenes footage of me in the stands enjoying the race and doing my FP1, FP2 report and qualifying and FP3 reports and everything. I can't wait, Mark, and it's going to be a great experience, and not just for the Formula One race, but the other series. There's Formula 1600, and you have the Ferrari series and the Porsche GT3 this year, and the Masters series of racing. So a lot of other series and great racing to watch this weekend, and I'm really excited. But the Formula One Grand Prix, Montreal, Canadian Grand Prix, has always been a very tough on the machine. And this year, McLaren had a lot of trouble with the Honda engine, and we were expecting big upgrades for Canada, but guess what? It's that type of year, that type of season, that type of partnership. The upgrades have been delayed, Mark, and they won't be present in Montreal.
It just seems to be another nail in the coffin of the McLaren-Honda partnership. That partnership, which was legendary, if you go back to the 1980s and the 1990s, has been nothing short of a disaster over the last couple of years. And there seemed to be a little bit of hope when you go back maybe just a month or 6 weeks, 2 months ago, whatever it was, when Honda actually was quite frank and quite, I think, forthcoming about the power deficiency that they have in their engines and the fact that they were basically working around the clock to get a solution in place and have that ready for Canada. So to have it turn out like this is not a surprise, but obviously quite disappointing. And I think what is more concerning is that there isn't really any timetable now, according to McLaren CEO Zak Brown, that they know it's coming, but they just haven't been told when.
No, exactly. No timetable. And Zak Brown now, it's not that they're threatening comments, but they're starting to get there. He's talking about being close to the fork in the road moment where you have to decide where your future resides and with who you're going to partner up with. They left Mercedes as a client engine. They were using Mercedes as a provider for the engine, and now they decided to partner up with Honda to maybe rekindle the late 80s, early 90s World Championship run they had together. It's the third season. Nowhere close to results, nowhere close to improvement. It actually is getting worse and worse. Talking about this season, like cars not even starting races. This is like crazy. We're talking about like Bush League type of result here for a Formula One team like McLaren with a lot of results in history and World Championship in their history. So where does it leave them? Like, it's close to the fork in the road moment, like Zak Brown mentioned, where maybe they have to decide to go with someone else.
Well, I think it's gotten very much to the point, and I think we've all been there in our lives at one point or another, and I don't think it really matters what it might be a relationship or a job or whatever, right? That you get to the point where you're frustrated and you make the threats and you want to make it change, you want to make it better, but you lay down that ultimatum and say, okay, well, if this doesn't happen or if this doesn't change, I'm done, I'm out of here. And then doesn't change, and you get to that point, it's like, what, I've had it. I'm finished. I'm just walking away. And at that point, all the anger and the frustration, everything seems to be gone. You just sort of calmly go on your way. And I almost wonder, just reading between the line of the lines of Zach Brown's comments, if McLaren actually hasn't already reached that point. I mean, there was already that rumor even, I guess 2 months ago, not too long after the start of the season, that they had already had some exploratory discussions with Mercedes to get an engine. I mean, Mercedes is already supplying several teams on the Formula One grid, and that McLaren-Mercedes partnership, if nothing else, was very successful, and also equally, if not so, more so iconic as McLaren-Honda. So we'll see. You definitely could not go wrong getting the Mercedes engine if you're Honda. If you're McLaren.
Well, if you're Honda, get your hand on a McLaren on a Mercedes engine and figure out how they do.
Rebadge it.
Just reverse engineering it, right? Speaking of the Mercs, Toto Wolff totally dismisses the claim that the Mercs will quit F1 after in 2018. This all stems from Eddie Jordan being on a podcast, on an interview, and talking about, well, I have nothing else to prove, and I wouldn't be surprised if eventually they leave F1. What else is to prove? You want to leave your legacy like it is and not necessarily become McLaren, right? So you either quit while you're ahead or you become what you don't want to be. But there's no substance to those comments. And Toto Wolff mentioned in an interview just a few days ago how, look, there's an actual contract with Formula One itself that Mercedes will be involved in the team ownership until 2020. And then it's to see again. But all signs point to Mercedes being there longer than not. So those comments are totally not worth it. And I don't know what Eddie Jordan was drinking, but that probably needs to be investigated.
Well, I think that Toto had a very similar thought to what you were just thinking, Kevin. And he said, and I quote, "Monaco is a place where people like to party, and it seems like somebody did a little bit too much of that. The reports are completely baseless and reflect nothing more than the mischievous speculation of one individual." So that pretty much, I think, sums up Eddie Jordan in two sentences.
Very colorful, extravagant individual. I remember... just a few weeks ago when he was doing the podium and how a shambles that became because of himself. And no offense, like, he's entertaining. It's very entertaining, but it's very colorful, very extravagant. And I remember the days of him being a team owner. That was always interesting, trying to always exploit a loophole in the rules to try to get an advantage day in, day out. That was Jordan. Very interesting time, I remember, in Formula One. But Eddie Jordan, there's no basis. Those comments are coming out of nowhere, and I don't expect Mercedes to quit F1 in 2018 at all.
No, that makes little sense. And of course, 2020 is the big, interesting benchmark or milestone that everybody's looking at, because that's when the current Concord agreement expires, and that's when the engine rules, I think, for these current hybrid turbo V6s are up. And so there's a lot that is really up in the air post 2020, but of course it's still 2.5 years from now, so that could all change. But yeah, I can't see Mercedes leaving Formula One at the end of next year. It seems too much of a stretch, Now, having said that, it'll probably happen. But to me, the logic, the logical explanation is that they will be there until 2020, and hopefully much more beyond that.
The thing is, outside of Formula One, what Eddie Jordan is using to make that statement makes sense. Because if I've been studying up on endurance racing and the WEC heading up to Le Mans, Mark, right? So I've been looking at races. I've been watching the 6 hours of Spa a few weeks ago now. It's on YouTube and everybody can watch it. And now it's a battle of Porsche versus Toyota. Just a few years ago, it was Audi and Peugeot. Audi and Peugeot are both out of endurance racing. They just both pulled the plug while they were dominating, pulled the plug. The amount of money cannot be justified. We're talking about LMP1, which is the top level of endurance racing in the world, the type of prototype, right? You all have those images in your head. That's the type of racing I'm talking about, the prototypes. the amount of development, engineering, research, and development, the money involved, it's even more than F1 almost. And Peugeot and Audi over the years decided to pull the plug and to use those resources somewhere else. So it does make sense. And they won. They established themselves on top of LMP1. They won 24 Hours of Le Mans. Eventually just pulled out. And there's actually talks now of Porsche and Toyota, maybe if one of the two might not last for the next few years. So that makes sense in that level. But Formula One, come on. Mercedes are going to be in Formula One.
Yeah, I can't see them not. I mean, it just seems so illogical. But I mean, we've seen other teams threaten to leave before. Most recently, it was Red Bull a couple of years ago. They were quite frustrated with the lack of performance they had in the Renault engine. I guess it would have been 2-3 years ago. Ferrari's threatened to quit probably every year since they've been in Formula One. So it is definitely nothing new. The only thing that's different about it this time is that it's not Mercedes themselves saying that they're going to leave because of one reason or another. But yeah, I think honestly, Kevin, that if it comes from Eddie Jordan, I think you have to take it with a big pinch of salt.
Yeah, exactly. But a good moment happened yesterday, Mark, in Valencia. Robert Kubica for the first time since 2011, actually since 2010, a driver that a lot of people will recognize, won his first race in Montreal when he was driving for Williams back in the day. Had a terrible accident in rally, almost left his life there. But now back in F1 for testing, Mark, he did 115 laps of an old Lotus painted in Renault colors, and he had mixed feelings. He was happy. He was happy to test himself. He'd been preparing for this moment for a year. Renault gave him a shot in the testing at the Ricardo Tormo circuit. But he had mixed feelings because he realizes the amount of pace, the speed, what he have lost over the years. And it's hard to maybe realize that, yeah, they're giving me a shot. I might want to do this, but I might not be able to keep up with the young guys.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see that Kubica's back in the car. And I thought also that what was a little bit surprising, and I guess obviously they don't want to maybe put more pressure on him than is necessary. They didn't publish any of the lap times that he did. So we have no real indication of how quick he was. But I mean, he almost lost his arm in that accident. What was it, in 2010 or 2011? And I gather that he still has some decreased mobility problems with
his
that
left hand. Yes, his left hand has decreased mobility. I don't know exactly what it is, but I know it's his left hand.
Yeah, so obviously,
you know what? It's his right arm. So there you go. I don't know. I just read the wrong one.
Well, the thing is, though, that I mean, he had a remarkable recovery, and I mean, he came very close to losing his arm in that accident, so all those years ago. So just to recover like he has is impressive, and to get back racing like he has is impressive. But to get back in a Formula One car where you basically have to do it all yourself is something completely different. So I mean, number one, you need the full range of motion, you need the dexterity, the mobility. And who knows, does he have the strength in the arm and the conditioning to actually withhold the rigors and the pressures and all the physical demands of Formula One and everything that your body goes through over the course of a Grand Prix, over the hour and a half or 2 hours and 300, 400 kilometers, whatever the length of the race might be. But very good to see him back. It was nice, and it was a bit weird to see that 2012 spec Lotus painted up in the Renault colors. So they did a little bit of work to get him in the cockpit.
Yeah, I know they did, and a little bit of paint at least. Speaking of paint, nice orange color drew a lot of attention overseas. We've talked about last week in our Monaco and Indy 500 review show, Mark, how we expected the TV audience numbers to climb a lot overseas, even though they might have been terrible domestically. We expected to be a Fernando Alonso effect, and there was one. Movistar doubled the viewership of Monaco GP this year with the Indy 500, and with the airing, with the time of with the time difference of Indy 500 and Spain, Europe. It was an interesting time during supper. It was a nice viewing experience, and that's one of the reasons why I think Alonso at Indy was a great success.
Well, absolutely, and it was interesting to see that some of the numbers did come out since the Indy 500 a week and a half ago, and it proves that there is interest there if they can get maybe some more recognizable names in the series, and I think they made a good point as well. If they're not going to race internationally, maybe perhaps they can at least get the television audience, get people tuning in, even if they aren't doing sort of a reduced sort of Formula One type series where they're traveling internationally. I mean, I think the last time they were trying to do something was maybe to race in Brazil. What was it, in 2014, 2015 to start their season?
I can't remember. I know they over the years they had like races in Australia, Mexico.
Yes.
But Mexico is probably feasible too. I remember Monterey was a very popular Grand Prix back in the day. But those are probably still feasible. But I've been following IndyCar too. Like I followed the Grand Prix of Detroit last weekend, and that's because of Alonso. I would not have paid attention to IndyCar probably if it wasn't for Alonso, and now I have. So I don't know what we can say about the numbers of the GP of Detroit, but I was interested, and it was fun to see a Grand Rahal with both the races on Saturday and Sunday. So that's because of Fernando Alonso. So maybe it's just me, but hey, he rekindled something for me too. So he did not only reawaken IndyCar's international push, he reawakened my international push for IndyCar.
Well, it would be nice because, I mean, it really has fallen off of the radar over the last 15 or 20 years. And we talked about it quite frequently in the run-up to Indy, just how massive it was, especially in the 80s and 90s. When I was a kid growing up, it was the thing. And watching the Indy 500 was appointment TV. You basically booked off that entire day to sit down, watch Indy and watch Monaco, because they've typically been run on the same day for years and years and years. And then while Formula One has stayed popular and increased in popularity around the world, Indy slowly died off. So the Fernando did do something. So the Fernando effect is real. Maybe it's not quite as prominent as the Mandela effect, but still, it's a thing.
No, exactly. And speaking of Fernando Alonso, back with McLaren for the Canadian Grand Prix, and we've talked about their trouble and their lack of upgrades. So they're getting ready for a tricky Canadian Grand Prix. They're not expecting anything. They just hope they can make it through the weekend without too much of an embarrassment.
Well, I was just kind of thinking, well, what if this is the race where Honda maybe finds some magic and they deliver them a nice, powerful, reliable engine, and they can actually be competitive during the race, maybe challenge for some points, or have just provide some excitement. It would just be peak McLaren if that happened, and then on the last lap, they either Van Dorn or Alonso put it into the wall of champions.
Well,
something.
Let's be objective here for a second, though. The performance in qualification, and yes, this can be skewed with tune-up, with the fine-tuning of the car, with the crate driving, the circumstances, the temperature of the track, and it's Monaco, yes, and in Barcelona, did a crazy lap by Alonso, but 9 for Button before he was relegated 50 slots on the grid, and Alonso 7th. Those are not bad qualifying results. So the performance can be quite possible. There's something that can be got. Like, there's something that you can squeeze out of the car. But it takes a lot of effort. And in a place like Montreal, where if it's hot and warm, it's hell for the engine and the brakes. That's maybe they're bracing for safety. They're ducking for cover because it could be painful in that way. But maybe they can squeeze out some performance of the car if you want to be a little bit of optimistic side. 9th and 7th, the last two qualifying in Formula One. Best result for McLaren. And wow, this could be, maybe they found something to get some performance out of the car.
Well, it's interesting that you were just talking about the weather, because obviously last year it wasn't a wet race, but it was damp and the track was a bit greasy. As I look at the weather forecast for Montreal now, Thursday is going to be sunny and partly cloudy with showers on Friday, partly sunny on Saturday, and then Sunday is going to be a chance of showers by the looks of it. So we could see very similar conditions to what we saw last year, but it's predicted to be a high of 26 degrees on Sunday afternoon. So it looks like the hottest part of the day is going to be right in that sort of sweet spot about the time that the race is going to be run. So we'll see. Obviously, that rain does make it very interesting. And I think, too, being... sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, sorry to interrupt, Mark. But
go ahead.
The rain makes it interesting, yes. But what do we know so far about let's just put Ferrari and the Mercs, right? What do we know?
Yeah.
Is Ferrari's got a heck of a lot more mechanical grip than anybody else on the field. If you add rain, which basically takes out that effect, it could be more contested. But because of the tires, of the rain tires are so efficient too, the amount of downforce generated and the amount of mechanical grip generated by the Ferrari, I think if there's rain, I think it's just going to highlight the performance of Ferrari. And if it's raining, I think Vettel's going to dominate even more. But I think it's just maybe the way I view things. But because of this circuit, because of Vettel's talent in the rain, we all know how Germans do in the rain. Just go back a few years ago, especially in the Ferrari colors. So I would not be surprised if it's raining. This will highlight what makes the Ferrari car this successful this year.
Yeah, well, it's also going to be interesting, too, because the problems that the Mercedes is having with the W08 is that they're just not being able to find enough temperature to keep the tires in the optimum performance range. And what's interesting is that when they can get the tires to the correct temperature, they can't always get them the fronts and the rears to really work together, because one set the front might be in the right temperature and the rears aren't, or vice versa. So they're having a lot of problems with that. And it was too bad, a couple of weeks ago, or several weeks ago now, in China, because that was kind of a similar circumstance to what we saw last year in Montreal. It wasn't like a full-on wet race, but the track was damp and greasy. And, well, obviously Hamilton won that race, and Vettel just got caught out by those safety cars at the beginning, and he did very well to come back through the field, but he wasn't really able to get closer than, what was it, about 6 or 8 seconds, something like that, to Lewis. So he never really got a chance to challenge him. So since then, I think that we've just gone on to see that the Ferrari has proven how good of a car that they have, and that Mercedes is just really struggling. And to see the race that they had in Monaco, well, not just the race, also qualifying, and then you see Lewis Hamilton not even get out of Q2 is nothing short of absolutely astonishing. I mean, well, you don't see...
There's circumstances why he didn't get out of Q2, right? It's because of Van Dorn hitting the wall. If it wasn't for Van Dorn, he would have barely got out of Q2 and maybe make a top 5 or 6 or something. And that would have been similar to what Bottas eventually did with the car, right? But it didn't get a chance because of... Was it Van Dorn? No, it was Palmer. Sorry, it was Julian Palmer hitting the wall. I'm just used to seeing Van Dorn in difficulties. That's why I imagine car in the wall. Oh, it's a McLaren. Has to be, right? Oh no, sorry, I made a mistake. But yeah, it was Julian Palmer in that case.
Well, the other thing too that not only was that unfortunate, I think I was referring more to the fact that the problems that Mercedes was having with their cars, that every time they tried to make a change to make the car better at Monaco, the changes actually made the car worse. So that was obviously quite unexpected for them. And I don't think that they've truly gotten their head around what the issues are with this car, because sometimes they've proven at times this year that the car is very good. And at other times, like we saw last week or a week and a half ago in Monaco, that it leaves a lot to be desired. So what are we going to get this week in Montreal? It's going to be quite interesting, because Montreal is more of a power circuit. But, I mean, there are a couple of tighter, twistier, more technical corners in part of the circuit there. So I don't know. Until proven otherwise, I think just based over what we've seen over the last couple of races, that unless Mercedes really figure out what's going on with their car, and if they can correct it, I think you really have to give the benefits to Ferrari, give them the advantage.
I agree, and a team that's not going to have the advantage for the next 3 races is Red Bull. Christian Horner is expecting difficult times ahead for the Red Bull, especially maybe in Montreal. The Renault engine, branded tag, for Red Bull has been a problem. The little bit of horsepower missing at the end of the day, about 50, makes a big difference. And yes, the chassis might be good, but because of development problems in the off season, they were a little bit behind in development. And some part of the chassis, especially what's the aero part and how it creates, well, it reduces drag. And those extra parts of development that we've seen on the Mercs and on Ferrari cars are not present with the Red Bull cars. And on circuits where you can need those upgrades because of the nature of the circuits in Montreal, how hard it is for the rest, and the amount of drag of energy reduced. Because of the long stretch in Montreal, if you reduce drag just a little bit, makes a big difference over the course of the race. So those little advantage that Ferrari and the Mercs have will make even tougher time for Red Bull. And that's one of the reasons why Christian Horner is actually worried for the next 3 races. Force India is very solid just because of reliability. And in the Constructors' Championship, they're getting quite close. And that could be an interesting battle over the next 3 races. Who would have thought, Mark, that the Red Bulls will be facing Force India in the Constructors' Championship?
Yeah, I think that Red Bull has to be my disappointment of the season so far. We kind of expected going into the season, based what we'd seen in testing, that they weren't quite there, but it looked like at least they were saying all the right things. And I know that Ricciardo's had a couple of podiums here and there over the last couple of races, which is really good for them, don't get me wrong. But, I mean, they really are the best of the rest. I mean, it really is all between the 4 cars, between Mercedes and Ferrari, and the four guys driving those ones. And then it's basically everybody else. Well, at least it's it's Red Bull kind of some distance behind Ferrari and Mercedes, and then everyone else behind them. But, yeah, Force India, they did very well at the Spanish Grand Prix about 3 weeks ago. And they, I think, are an example of a team that have done very well with the money that they have at their disposal. They have a fairly decent chassis. Obviously, they have the Mercedes power. And they could, on their day, they can surprise people and nick points off of other teams. So it will be something to watch to see if they'll be able to put one over on Red Bull.
Force India overtook Williams as like the fringe 4th, 5th team, right, in the standings. Yep. And I think you nailed it on the head. The Merc engine makes a big difference. It did for Williams too. But I think the chassis and the rest of the car built to go with that powertrain makes a big difference for Force India, and the contribution of the 2 young drivers that outside of Monaco have been very reliable. And it's outside circumstances in Monaco too, it's never really your fault, right? The rail is coming so quickly, it's never really your fault. There's always something happening along the sea. But I am interested in looking how Force India continues to slowly but surely, and not by being the fastest car, because there is still a big gap competitively between them and Red Bull, but because of reliability, because of playing it safe and just trying to finish sometimes. And hey, you have to finish before you actually make point. We've seen Force India make big stride forward.
Well, they have, and I think it's very interesting too. Like you say, they have a couple of very good drivers in Checo Perez and also Esteban Ocon, who really, I thought for me last year was quite impressive, because he came in the latter part of the season after Rio Haryanto ran out of sponsorship money. Sort of, I guess it was in the summer sometime, and Manor Racing being very much one of those pay-to-drive teams. And if you have a nice big sponsorship package, then doors just open for you. Anyways, Ocon, I thought he did very well in the several races that he did for them, and he's been, for me, very impressive so far this year at Force India. And like you say, they have overtaken Williams, who really, I think, well, obviously, if Red Bull's a disappointment for me, then Williams is also a massive disappointment so far this year for me. I really expected, what with Paddy Lowe going there, that even if they didn't start the season maybe so strong, that at least that they would start recovering at some point, and we haven't really seen any of that quite yet. But I just wanted to pick up just on what you were saying about the Mercedes power just now. I thought it was very interesting in Monaco last week, just how the Mercedes power was so apparent, because as we were saying earlier, just the lack of performance and just how off the pace that Mercedes was. But you had Valtteri Bottas and then Max Verstappen and the Red Bull behind him. And Max, in some of those tighter parts of the circuit, would get tucked right up underneath Bottas's gearbox. But then when they come out of the corners, you could just see that Bottas had that power in his Mercedes engine. Just when he put down the power, he would just pull away. And that just made the job for Max that much more difficult. I mean, obviously, it's almost impossible to pass in Monaco as it is. But if there's one guy that would try, it would be Max Verstappen. And he just, every time he got close enough, Bottas just always had that little bit of extra power just to be able to pull it out a little bit and just keep him just, I guess, tantalizingly far enough ahead of Max Verstappen just to keep him at bay for most of the race.
I was listening to you, Mark, and I was nodding my head because I basically have a race simulator in my living room now. And I've been racing on Monaco circuit, and I've been hitting the guardrails every single time. I've been finishing in the pit with suspension problems every race, and I can't even imagine how they do it. So no, it's such a difficult feat. Still, Mercedes, as much as their engine is powerful, they still have complications. And I've addressed this the last show. And the more and more I hear Toto Wolff, and the more I hear the engineers talk about this car, it's a very fast car, but it's very, very, very capricieux in French. I would say it's very tedious. It needs to be taken care of just the right way. It needs to be set up just correctly to get the most out of it. And the W08 F1 car, as it's called, it's still not the best, but I still think that this car, if it's tuned correctly, could be maybe a bit better than Ferrari. But what's really interesting to me for this car is it's so complicated, and I just use the suspension, and underneath the cockpit, if you would see how the suspension is built for the Merc compared to Ferrari, it's a very different system, way more complicated with actuators and sensors and computers dictating how the weight and everything is shifted up until the fraction of a second to get the most out of everything. When you overcomplicate things, you find yourself sometimes finding trouble finding the right setup, and you get lost. And guess what? That's exactly what we saw in Monaco. So that's one of the things that Ferrari don't bother with. Build a car and trying to get the most out of it and trying to get a fast car. And we've seen this happen. And in Montreal, it's a test of the cars, and it's going to be a test of attrition. And that's why I'm excited, Mark.
Yeah, it should be. And Montreal, I think, is also a very interesting circuit. And it's also been a place where Mercedes have had problems with the brakes over the last couple of years. So that'll be something to keep an eye on this weekend. So whether or not they have the pace, and whether or not they have any problems with the brake temperatures over the course of the afternoon. Well, maybe the entire weekend.
Yep, exactly. Reliability, which has been maybe a downfall of the Mercs this season, might be tested once again this weekend. And speaking of being tested, it's the weekly segment that we have found ways to talk about since the beginning of the season. Let's take a stroll with Lance, Mark. Lance Stroll, not feeling the pressure to score points. He should, though. Going back home, Montreal, first Canadian Grand Prix with Williams, not having the best of season, a lot of media obligation this week. Crazy schedule. How will Lance do this weekend, do you think, Mark?
Well, let's just put it this way. If there was a race where he finally gets into the top 10 and brings some points home, this would be the weekend to do it. And then also, I think doubly, it would be good for him to get some points this weekend, just with each and every passing race.
He could literally bring points home, though, Mark. He could literally win points and go back to Montreal, and he actually brought points home.
I mean, literally you would, right? But I mean, also I think it would be doubly important to do it this week, because every passing race that he doesn't finish in the points, there are more and more criticisms, and the naysayers and the doubters get more and more vocal. So hopefully for his sake, he can get it done, because I think it would also just give him a boost of confidence and finally get a bit of payoff for all the work that he's put in, because it really has not gone very good for him so far. I mean, I think a lot of the times we forget to keep in perspective that he is only 18 years old, but at the end of the day, he is a Formula One driver, and they're all supposed to be the best drivers in the entire world. So there are obviously big expectations on these guys to perform, and I don't know. I don't know if I'm willing to go out of the branch and say that he's going to do it, but sure, why not? I'm going to say that Lance is going to get P9. Let's go with that.
Bold predictions from
Bold
Mark.
prediction.
I will give my predictions during the weekend. You will be able to catch my reports on our Facebook page, Scuderia F1 Podcast on Facebook. I will do some live reporting live from the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. From the stands, come say hello. I'll be somewhere. Just, you'll find me. You'll see. Mark, I want to leave you on a thought before we say goodbye. Something that's been worked on, it's during the Formula E circuit, and we're going to see this late July in Montreal. There's actually cars being built without drivers. Robo-cars, robo-races. It might be in the near future. But what's interesting to me is the lap time, quicker than humans, that this car can do. Actually quicker than a Formula E time, at least. With the same type of car, with no driver. Yes, it has a bit more aerodynamic to it, but one car only in a program that designed by engineers and drivers and the team and everything. They programmed the optimum trajectory, the optimum car telemetry to do a lap, and that car did, and it's almost unbeatable by human, like a second faster. Maybe the future is not too far away where we actually have races without drivers.
Wouldn't that be something? But I think they're two completely different things. I think one is more of a sporting kind of point of view, which would be Formula One, where you have the whole package of things, including the driver, and the driver could be the guy that makes the biggest difference. I mean, look at Ferrari and Mercedes, for example. You have Sebastian Vettel and Kimi Räikkönen in Ferrari, and Mercedes. You have Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas. And just the difference that you see between the two cars in those teams, it really comes down to who's sitting in the cockpit and who's the guy that's actually driving it. So the other side of that is more of, I would say, there's still a sporting aspect to it, because you're designing and building a car and you're putting all the components in it and you're trying to make the quickest, most competitive package out there. But when it comes to actually getting it on the track, it almost becomes an issue of programming it, I would say, just to put it very simply, to get it to go around the track and go into the corners and change gears and speed up, slow down, and all those things that a car does. But I think for me, maybe I'm just, I guess obviously I'm not old-fashioned, because obviously basically all forms of motorsport, there's still a driver behind the car. But I think the human aspect is what makes it interesting, just the talent of individual drivers, and why one guy compared to his teammate is not as quick, or why a guy that has inferior equipment is sometimes quicker than everybody else. So I think that just adds something different to Formula One and to motor racing in general.
No, I have to agree with you. It's more about the drivers. That's a driver who's fun, who can create rivalries. Who cares about the rivalry between two engineers behind closed doors behind a laptop?
Exactly. And besides, so I think part of the allure of motorsports, like you say, is the drivers, and especially as maybe tormenting it is to see unhappy Alonso, but there is a part of me that finds a little bit of amusement in some of the pictures that you see with grumpy Fernando. Although I like the happy Fernando at Indy as well. Yeah. So,
but put a camera on that car and a guy in a chair somewhere with a VR set and controlling the car. I could get behind that, but that's like drone racing, basically, just with a car.
Yeah, it's almost like esports on steroids, if you want to put it that way. It's like
it's drone racing and esports having a love child.
Yeah, pretty much, right?
On that note, Mark, where can we find you everywhere on social media?
Well, you can find me on social media at Mark J.R. Dailey, and that is Dailey with an L-E-Y at the end. You can follow the program here at Scuderia F1 Pod on Twitter, on Facebook, Instagram. We're all over the place. We're all over social media. We love it.
And you can follow me on Twitter at Kev Laramée and the network at sportspodcastingnetwork.com and on social media at sportspodnet. And as always, until next time, have a great F1.
Thanks for listening to the Scuderia F1 podcast. If you want to get the show notes for this episode, then head over to ScuderiaF1pod.com. Want to get in touch with us? Then email us at ScuderiaF1pod@gmail.com.
You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.